All right, so today we're going to dive into something that I think a lot of people in drug development kind of get anxious about.
Yeah.
And it's this whole world of dealing with the FDA's feedback. You know,
Mm.
you go through all this work to develop this drug, and then you submit everything, and then you get this like huge response back, and you got to figure out like, okay, how do we deal with this? How do we respond?
Yeah.
It's like this big puzzle
Yeah,
almost.
you've poured so much into this, and it can feel like a real setback
Totally.
when you first get that feedback, but it's such an important piece of this whole process.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, you want safe and effective drugs out there, so
Yeah.
we got to go through these hoops.
Exactly. It's for a good reason.
Yeah.
And it's not just about like the FDA telling you what to do, right?
Right?
It's a back and forth. It's a dialogue. It's an ongoing
Global
conversation.
conversation.
So today what we want to do is really unpack how to have that conversation effectively with the FDA. What are the different ways they communicate with you? And then how do you use all that feedback to actually make your application stronger
Yep.
and get that drug approved?
Absolutely.
So we'll be looking at things like strategies for tackling that feedback. What does that resubmission process look like? And how do you think strategically about the different types of meetings that you can have with the FDA?
Exactly. And one thing I really want to emphasize is that, getting feedback doesn't mean that you failed. It's actually a good sign that they're looking at it.
Yeah.
They're giving you feedback.
They're engaged.
They're engaged. Exactly. And so, think of it as this iterative process. It goes back and forth. And the whole point is to refine that dossier and make it the best it can be.
Okay, so you get this feedback, and it could be, just a few pages, or it could be a whole novel.
Right.
Where do you even start? What's the first step when you're tackling regulatory feedback?
Well, I think the first thing is to really be organized and meticulous. Don't just skim it. You really need to read through every single comment, every question, every concern they raise.
Oh, wow.
It's like being a detective. You have to understand why they're asking what they're asking. Sometimes a comment might seem small,
Right.
but it could point to a bigger issue.
So it's not just about like answering the question on the surface.
Exactly.
You got to kind of figure out the why behind the question.
Exactly. Why are they asking this? What's the rationale behind it?
Okay, so once you understand that why, what's the best way to actually structure your response?
So the most important things are clarity and conciseness.
Okay.
Your response to each point needs to be direct and clear. You want to avoid jargon as much as possible. And if you have to use technical terms, make sure you define them really clearly.
Okay.
You want the reviewers to understand what you're saying. Think of it like a scientific publication.
Gotcha. So just like in a paper, you're presenting your findings in a really clear and logical way. And I imagine it's not enough to just state your answer.
Right.
You kind of got to show your work too.
You do. Every response needs to be supported by data
Okay.
or a really strong scientific rationale. So, for example, if they're asking for more data on a particular side effect,
Right.
you need to explain why you made the choices you made. You need to provide evidence from the literature or maybe from your own data to support your approach. Same thing if they have questions about manufacturing.
Right.
You've got to give them details about your controls, testing procedures, and how you ensure quality.
And thinking is like in any kind of process like this where it's complicated and there are a lot of moving parts, there are bound to be times where you don't agree with the feedback or where something seems contradictory.
Yeah.
Maybe the feedback contradicts something else in the regulations.
Right.
Or even like different parts of the FDA might seem to be saying different things. How do you handle those situations?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it does happen. So when you encounter a situation where you disagree with the feedback or you see a conflict, the key is to be respectful and professional.
Okay.
You need to clearly explain your perspective,
Mm-hmm.
provide the data and the reasoning that support your position, and you might even reference specific parts of the regulations
Okay.
that you think are relevant.
So it's like you're laying out your argument.
Exactly. It's like a scientific debate.
Yeah.
You present your evidence, you make your case, and you keep in mind that the goal is patient safety and effective treatment.
You're both working towards the same goal, ultimately.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier these different types of meetings that you can have with the FDA.
Right.
It seems like that's a way to kind of get ahead of things and maybe address potential issues before you even get that formal feedback.
Exactly.
Can you walk us through the different types of meetings?
Yeah, so the FDA has this tiered system of meetings, type A, type B, and type C. And they're designed to help you communicate with them throughout the entire process of drug development, and each type has a specific purpose.
Okay, let's start with type A meetings. When would you typically request one of those?
So type A meetings are for the really critical issues.
Okay.
Things that could seriously impact your whole development program. Like if the FDA puts a clinical hold on your trial because of safety concerns, or if there's a big disagreement about the design of a study.
Right.
These are situations where you need to talk to the FDA right away.
Like an emergency almost.
Exactly. It's your emergency hotline to the FDA.
Okay, so that's type A for emergencies.
Yeah.
What about type B meetings?
So type B meetings happen at key milestones in your drug development.
Okay.
Things like the pre-IND meeting before you even start clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
So you can talk about your overall plan. Then there's the end of phase 1 meeting where you look at the initial safety data, the pharmacokinetic data, and then there's the really important end of phase 2 pre-phase 3 meeting. And that's where you talk about the design of your pivotal phase 3 trial.
The ones that are going to support your eventual approval.
Exactly. So the goal here is to get the FDA's input and make sure everyone's on the same page.
It's like getting expert advice at these really crucial points in your development.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got type A for emergencies, type B for these key milestones. What about type C meetings? What are those for?
Type C meetings are kind of like the catch-all category for questions or issues that don't fit into type A or type B.
Gotcha.
So maybe you need to clarify a specific regulation, or you want guidance on some aspect of your preclinical or clinical program that's not tied to a specific milestone.
Okay.
Or maybe you're using a new analytical method
Yeah.
and you just want to get their take on it.
So it's like office hours with the FDA.
Exactly.
You can just go in and ask them questions about specific things.
Yeah, and it's really valuable because it can prevent problems down the road.
So being proactive and using these meetings strategically can really help make the whole process smoother.
Absolutely. You get a better understanding of what the FDA expects. You can address concerns early on, and you might avoid delays or surprises later.
So let's say you've had your meetings, you've gotten feedback on your application, and now you need to make changes and maybe resubmit.
Right.
How does addressing that feedback actually make your dossier stronger and more likely to be approved?
So by directly addressing the feedback, you're basically building a more complete and convincing argument for your drug's safety and efficacy.
Okay.
You're filling in the gaps, addressing their concerns, and making the whole package stronger.
So it's like you're putting together a puzzle.
Exactly.
And the FDA is pointing out where there are missing pieces or where things don't quite fit.
Yep. And when you make those revisions, whether it's getting more data, clarifying information, or even changing your protocols,
Right.
you're showing that you're taking their input seriously and that you're committed to meeting their standards.
And this back and forth, this whole process of getting feedback, making changes, and maybe resubmitting, that's normal, right?
It's very normal.
It's not a sign that you've done something wrong.
Not at all. It's just part of the process. Most drug applications go through multiple rounds of review.
Okay, so it's really a refinement process. Each round makes the application better.
Exactly.
Now, something that we talked about before was the importance of avoiding redundancy when you're putting together your resubmission.
Right.
I can imagine the reviewers don't want to read the same thing over and over again.
They don't.
How do you be concise and really highlight the changes you've made?
Yeah. So when you resubmit, you need to clearly show what you've changed based on the feedback.
Okay.
Don't just copy and paste huge sections from your original submission.
Right.
A good practice is to create a separate document that links each piece of feedback to the specific place in your updated dossier where it's been addressed.
Okay, so it's like a roadmap for the reviewers.
Exactly. They can see exactly how you've responded to each point.
That makes a lot of sense.
It makes the review process much more efficient. And it shows that you're paying attention to detail.
So I think this has been really helpful. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
And I think the main takeaway is that regulatory feedback, it's not something to be scared of.
Right.
It's an opportunity to improve your application.
Yeah.
Resubmission is a normal part of the process.
Yeah.
And using those different types of FDA meetings strategically can really help you navigate the whole process more effectively.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that you and the FDA are working towards the same goal,
Right.
which is getting safe and effective medicines to patients.
And that's a goal we can all get behind.
Definitely.
So on that note, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about seeking and incorporating feedback, communicating effectively with stakeholders, and using different channels for that communication.
Right.
But what about applying these principles outside of drug development?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about your own field, your own projects. Could adopting a similar mindset lead to better outcomes, even if you're not developing a new drug?
That's a really good question.
So something to ponder as you go about your day.
I like it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.